So if you've ever had a thought to what would it take to vibe code my own applicant tracking system, hopefully this video and this series that we're about to launch is going to be right up your alley. So what we're actually going to do is go through the whole build process of actually developing an AI-first ATS and all the different considerations that we would put in place and actually build it out live in real time so that you can see all the steps that we're going to go through. And so this is the first step in that process. And it's actually a lot of admin and pre-work that we've done in order to just make sure that the rest of the build goes well. So this is probably going to be the least interesting video you're going to watch, but I wanted to go over the baseline just so that anyone that's coming in fresh can actually see where we started, especially if you're months in the future and you actually look back and want to see where we've ended up. So the first thing that I did was actually go through a standard startup entrepreneurship process to try and figure out what is the market here, like what actually exists in the ATS world that's not currently solved, because there are actually some really good applicant tracking systems out there, and especially for larger companies, many of them are already solving the problems that exist. And so there's a few limitations that we are working with here, in that we're developing something that is going to be small, we're actually going to manage ourselves. And so we're not going to have a big team, we're not going to raise venture funding, we're actually just going to show how we would build this from the ground up. And at the end of this process, we're actually going to turn this into hopefully a course that you could potentially take and actually learn how to use more AI in your day-to-day workflow. So that's going to expand on some of the work we're going to do here. And if we actually get enough interest, we may actually build this ATS as an offering and launch it to the market. So the first thing that I did was actually start with the Disciplined Entrepreneurship 24 Steps. So if you're not familiar, I've actually had this book since business school over 10 years ago, used this to launch actually a few startups that I've worked on. And I think it's a really good approach to trying to think through, is there actually a market for the company I want to launch? What is the potential scale for this? How do people actually acquire it? Who's my customer? What is the go-to-market plan? What is the next step? How do I think about beachheads? So all these kind of things are really outlined there. It's not very expensive, but I would really recommend, if you're considering something like this, just take a look at that book, look at the processes. And what we've done is created a slide deck here. This is actually what we did at MIT when we were developing business plans. So we would present these slides each week to our peers and they would tear them apart. Our professor Bill Alette would tear them apart and we would move forward and then gradually consolidate teams. And that was how my first startup was built. And what we've done here is actually created an idea for this Recruit Copilot. It's a domain I bought a few years ago when I thought copilots were going to become a thing. Not really done anything with it. So I thought, hey, why not build this out as our new AI-first applicant tracking system process. But I really wanted to figure out, where are we actually going to launch this into? Who's going to be interested in something that we're going to vibe code and build out in public over the next couple of months? And actually went through the whole 24 steps process. And you can see it all here. We're not going to go through step by step. What we did come up with is essentially a bunch of assumptions. And so as we're developing this and building this, we're actually going to be testing these assumptions. And the 4 assumptions that we're working with is that the applicant tracker system was built for scarce, trustworthy, unpriced hiring decisions. So if you go back several years, you actually need to hire a lot of different people. And the way that people hired in the past is actually very different from how we hire today. And trust is becoming a really big part of that process, with fake candidates on the employer side, actually fake job postings potentially on the candidate side. There's actually a loss of trust in this process. And so one of the things that we might want to see happen in the market is to increase the trust that when a candidate is sent from a recruiter to a hiring manager, that candidate is real and trustworthy and has the demonstrated skills that they say they do, so that we can actually be confident we're making good decisions. Boutique agencies are the one segment where switching costs are low enough. Now, larger companies probably go through an RFP process. I think what we actually want to be able to do is have the person who is going to be using this system be the one who has the credit card to just pay for it and switch it on. And assumptions 2 and 3 are, I think, really focusing our efforts on building something that boutique agencies, so think an individual recruiter who's working by themselves, or a recruiter that's running a small firm and wants the most effective applicant tracking system for themselves, Maybe we'll build it themselves, and that's why we're building this in public, so that if you are in that place and you do experiment with AI tools, you could potentially build this out yourself. A lot of people in that space watch this channel, and so we'll actually hopefully get a lot of information out of this, even if we never wind up selling this software anyway. But if we do sell the software, the actual acquisition cost is very low, which means that we can keep the price low. And so if we have to hire a huge sales team in order to sell this, then we have to increase the price in order to be profitable, or we need to raise a bunch of money, hire a huge sales team, aggressively sell this and aggressively market this, and hopefully eventually reach the point where we get to enough scale that we can make money by increasing prices and then pay back our investors and either go public or get acquired. That's not the business plan here. We're just trying to build something that solves a problem. We'd like to be able to offer it for a low enough price that people would be willing to pay for it. And if we don't wind up launching it, that's not a big deal either, because we haven't invested millions of dollars worth of investment cost up front. And so the final piece here that we're going to be testing is that integrity is the plane of the product that is self-service shaped. And so what do we mean by that? We know that there are a lot of different applicant tracking systems out there. And so if all we're doing is gathering information on candidates and sending them to hiring managers, that's actually a commodity piece of software. The only benefit to building it yourself is maybe doing it for lower cost, but there's some very cheap applicant tracking systems out there right now. The integrity part is if I'm running an agency and I want to know that when I send a candidate to a hiring manager, that candidate is the person that they say they are, they've got the skills that they said that they have, that's actually going to reflect back on me as the agency owner, because I want to make sure that we're delivering a very high quality product, not just in terms of quality of hire, but actually in quality of the candidates that we're sending them in terms of overall kind of reduction in fraud and everything like that. So can we build a small applicant tracking system for boutique agencies that's actually going to improve the integrity of the candidates that get sent through? And what does that then mean in terms of the build out, and how do we leverage AI in order to, one, accelerate the build, but actually two, do some of that check-in as we're sending candidates through, so we don't get caught up, we don't have to spend manual time checking the individual candidates, but we're also not replacing anything that currently exists, especially some of the low-cost solutions. So that's the kind of the high-level plan. How do we actually build it out? I started off with a new project in Claude. So you can see how we've developed this through 3 different chats. Initially, I was looking at market analysis and feature ranking. That's where I took the 24 steps and actually went through that process, capturing data from the market, querying and kind of pressure testing with Claude as my kind of co-pilot to actually build out what this might potentially look like. The other thing I did there, which was a favorite from business school, was create this press release. This is something that Amazon uses whenever they're considering a new product launch. So I said, okay, let's assume that we launch this, and we launch this in the new year. What are we going to say when we launch it? So with our press release and with our slide deck, we can now start to think about how we're actually going to build out the process. And so what we've done here is within the project, we've then started to think about what is the ATS playbook and how do we create the overview of what we're trying to build. Again, this is really just myself scoping this out for how I actually want to build this. And you'll be able to see the output of all this. I don't want to take you through the kind of step-by-step. It was a lot of me interrogating Claude giving me feedback, honing in on what exactly do we want to build here. And what we've done is taken all of the outputs from these files and dropped them into the project context here, so that we have our Recruit Copilot business plan in a slide deck, change it to PDF so that we could actually upload it. I have a brand playbook, have a TA playbook. So actually, how do I think about the right process to follow when going through hiring, the kind of launch press release, and then the Claude files that we're actually going to create and use and refer back to as we're going through this process. And so we went through all of that and then started to move on to creating the landing page as like our first context. And so the way that we actually did that, and I'm going to pull up the file here. So this is our IDE, our integrated development environment. And what I do is use this. It's VS Code, and this is actually going to give me that ability to play with Claude code and actually see the output. So I know a little bit of coding, and so I can actually go in and change things. I've used VS Code for a while, and so I like that. I can actually access everything through Claude code on the side here. You can see the sessions we've already run, and all this is doing is actually helping me to build out the initial approach. You can see in here we do have our brand development work. So the output of the branding work that I did actually gave me this this kind of a branding, color scheme, font. So it's going to be very different to what I'm using for Meander, because we actually want it to feel like something that could be usable by boutique recruiting agencies and is a little bit more kind of modern and AI forward. A couple of other things that are in this file, we have our kind of web folder. This is actually where all of our front end work is going to be based. Then we have our API, which is where all the back end work is going to be. And that's how we're going to build that out in the future. So if you imagine that the way this works, there's actually three components. There's the front end, which is what you as a operator will actually work with. So how you click through things, how you drag and drop things, basically like how you manage the data in your system. The backend does all of that processing for you. When you want to actually do an AI call, when you want to interact with the database, the backend is the thing that is going to be protected so you don't leak data, and is the thing that's actually going to route everything for you moving forward. That's one thing that we're going to come to a little bit later, because we want to get the front end in the right structure first. And then the database is actually where all that data is stored. That's the secured server where we're actually going to put all of our information in a structured format. We're going to wait until we actually have the backend built out to actually build that, so that we can make sure that everything kind of works and fits together nicely. But the majority of the work initially is going to be focused on the front end, on the web. And so there's two prompts that you'll see in the folder. And what I'll do at this point is actually direct you over to the GitHub page. It's a little bit easier to see. So this is all public. So you can just go to Recruit Copilot GitHub page, and the links will be in all the show notes. So you can actually look at what I'm doing, the current status. This is August 4th, 2026. So obviously this is going to change a lot. But if you go into the prompt section, you can see the prompts that we've used. So there's two here. There's one is a Claude kickoff prompt. And this is actually going to get the process started. And we'll be changing this over time as we go through it, and probably interacting a lot with Claude Cowork. But the one that I want to focus on right now is the landing prompt, the landing page prompt. So this is actually what we're going to do to build out that initial view. So if you go to recruitcopilot.com, you'll actually be able to see what we're building. You'll be able to register interest. And this is really what we're going to use just to prove out that our development and our push to production actually works, so that when we actually start to do things a little bit more complicated, we've already smoothed the flow a little bit and greased the pipes. So all this is covering off all the different elements. One thing I like to use for UI, user interface development, is Vercel's V0. So just v0.app. And what you can actually do is use a chat interface to develop quite nice looking user interfaces. And so all I did here was I just pasted the prompt directly into this chat window. And you can see it went through all this whole process and then run a bunch of tests. I then didn't like the kind of initial draft, so I gave it back a little bit more comments. It went back and did it again, and then eventually came back after the last thing was 3 minutes, and it gave me my initial draft. And so here we are. We have a kind of rendered page that we can actually go through. It's got the headline of what we're trying to do. If I expand this out a little bit, you can see this is actually how it's going to look when we don't have the chat window in place. If I click Get Early Access, that should take me down to, okay, if I want to build my own or I want to buy this one, this is an interest form. So while we're building the ATS, we're actually going to learn a lot about the process, and then that's going to turn into a course that you can take if you actually want to not even necessarily build your own ATS, but use AI more in your day-to-day workflow. And this is what you end up with. If you want to take the course, you can register your email here. And so eventually this is going to be, instead of Get Early Access, it'll be log in. You can then log in to your agency, and you'll have your own branded interface that's then going to give you everything that you need as we're building this out. So without going into too much detail, that's what we've got. Here's the full build that we're going to go through in this series. Very explicitly, what does it not do? There's a few things that I did want to take out because it's automated and we're using AI. I don't want to rank candidates directly in here. I don't want to decide who we're going to advance. I don't want to verify a claim that the applicant never made. So we're not using any kind of other sources of data. We're going to keep it all above board. We're not going to go down the path of any of the AI tools that have faced lawsuits recently. So all we're going to do is actually just create a way that's a streamlined way to manage the candidate flow, given that most boutique agencies are not really managing heavy inbound loads anyway. They're actually sourcing themselves and actually putting the candidates in either by email or just taking a resume or a LinkedIn PDF and dropping it into a file. So all those are going to become pretty explicit. But what we actually did then is take this mock application that was developed here. Now you can actually deploy directly through Vercel. I like to keep everything within my environment and actually use Azure, Microsoft Azure to host everything. It's just what I'm most experienced with. And so I'm not going to go into the development side of that because depending on what you use will really vary your output. And there's so much information available online, it should be fairly straightforward. And if you can't find it, just ask Claude or OpenAI or whichever one you use. But all I do here is download the zip file, then drop the zip file into my folder over here, and then asked Claude Code to review everything that's in that file, then transfer it over to my web folder and set it up so that the application will run locally on my machine when I run this in my terminal down at the bottom here. What that means is that I can go from this hosted website from Vercel onto this locally hosted proof of concept. And this gives me a clickable interface so I can actually go through. And you can see here on the right hand side, but you can see everything is built out here and we've got everything in place. And so once this is in place, we then want to think about what are the initial kind of pieces of plumbing that we actually want to get put into place so that we can actually use this. And there's a few things that we need. One is we need to be able to capture when people say I'm interested and fill in this form, we need to be able to capture who they are. This is probably not something that you're going to need to do if you're just building out the ATS for yourself, but maybe if you're actually putting job postings online, you might actually want people to join your talent community and stay alerted when anything that's interesting comes up. So you can actually start to collect different information here. The one I've used is called Mailjet. And what that allows you to do is when someone registers here, they will actually send their registration details to a Mailjet server and put them in a contact list. And so whenever I want to email everyone that has signed up for early access, I just send it to one distribution list, and then Mailjet's going to handle the delivery and it's going to track all the performance. Same with the course that goes to a separate mailing list. So you can see how I've already started to plumb that up. And the way that actually works in practice here, I'm not going to show you the actual credentials, but in the end example here that you'll be able to download from the GitHub, there's there's 4 Mailjet fields that you need to fill out. There's an API key and a secret key, which is what you get that allows your product, your tool to actually access the Mailjet servers directly. And then when you actually set up new contact lists, you'll get contact list IDs. This is how Mailjet does it. And so once that's set up, whenever you fill out an email here, it's going to go directly to the server. And so everything's working locally at this point. You can test it, you can experiment with it, and everything looks really good. While I was developing this, because I had the recruitcopilot.com domain, it actually stuck the email address down at the bottom here, which is really helpful because then if someone wants to email me, they just get a simple mail to. But none of this was actually wired up. And so what I needed to then do is go through my domain hosting and actually set this up so that I could actually access it. Claude can walk you through it and actually give you the direct step-by-step instructions, which is what I asked it to do. So everything was then set up. So now when I go to my inbox in my Meander Gmail account, I actually have a separate drop-down Google group that is hello@recruitcopilot.com. So when you email that, it comes directly to my main inbox. I have it filtered out so I can actually look at any inbound that we get from there. And so now there's 2 different ways for people to stay in touch. One is to send an email directly to me at recruitcopilot.com. And then the other one is to actually just drop your email in here. So if you actually do want the course or you do want the software, I'll be able to track how many people are actually submitting. The one thing to call out here is if you are going to set up something like this, you probably need to add these custom contact properties. So I wanted to know if someone's signing up for the software, how big is their agency and what are they currently using? And that's going to really help me to think through if we actually start to get a lot of interest, we can actually tailor the build towards the people that are expressing interest. And so if we're making decisions for agency sizes of 1, but actually most of the people that sign up run agency sizes of 6 to 10, we actually then know we need to think about multi-user integration and how that's going to work and how do you share candidates across different recruiters. So there's a lot of considerations that go in here, and what we're doing is already taking product decisions from the landing page that we've created that we're then going to feed in to the development a little bit further on. And so that was the kind of local test. Once I was confident that all that was running, I then wanted to actually deploy it to production. And so the way that I actually deploy all my things is directly through this Microsoft Azure integration into VS Code. And this is why I like VS Code, because it has the integration to hosting. All I've done is set up a brand new resource group here that's going to be for my Recruit Copilot, set up the web production. And so this is actually the one that I'm going to then use to send all of my front-end development work. And all I need to do from here is there's a few settings to tune up, including actually transferring all those environment variables that we've set in the local and tested to make sure they work onto the server. Just right click and deploy to web app, and that's actually going to push all of the code that I've written directly onto a server. And after doing a little bit of finagling with the domain hosting to actually point that to my Azure server, I then have recruitcopilot.com pointing directly at the site that we've just created. And I just, before I started recording, filled in my personal email address, sent it to make sure that the contact list works. And so now we have everything built out. So we know that if someone's interested, they can fill in the form. If someone wants to get in touch with me directly, they can actually email hello@recruitcopilot.com. It's completely separate from all my other brands. And now we actually have the kind of initial proof of concept built out so that we can actually start working on development of the tool itself. And that's really where it starts to get more exciting. If you're building this for yourself, you can probably pick and choose what elements of that you actually want to do. One thing I would recommend doing early on is actually set up that deployment to production so you know how that's going to work, because that may tailor your approach moving forward. And then when you get to the point where you actually want to deploy it and test it, you don't get surprised if something that worked in your local environment then doesn't work when you actually get it onto your main servers. I really like Azure. I found it the most user-friendly. We've used Google Cloud in the past. I've played around with AWS, and I think there's a million different other options as well. But I hope that's a helpful introduction. I'm actually really excited about this project because it's going to allow me to take a lot of the things that I've learned, put them into practice, actually experiment live. I don't know how it's going to turn out by the time we get to the end of this series. I don't know how long the series is going to take. I don't know if we're actually going to sell the product or just turn this into a really helpful course. But all of the initial build out is going to be free online. So if you do like this, please follow along, and then we'll take it from there, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you.